You might not realize it, but your life is being shaped by a quiet force, one that promises joy, but often leaves you feeling hollow. It doesn't scream or demand your attention. It whispers. It hides in comfort, disguises itself as reward, and justifies its grip with the phrase, "I deserve this." Over time, you stop noticing it. You forget what silence sounds like. You forget what deep focus feels like. You don't feel miserable, but you don't feel alive either. You just drift. And if you're not careful, that drifting becomes your life. Nietzsche wasn't afraid to say what most people still avoid. That comfort, unchecked, can become a kind of prison. That a society obsessed with pleasure will slowly lose its ability to endure, to think deeply, and to grow. And that the very things we chase to feel better often end up weakening us the most. The modern world sells you the lie that happiness is found in more comfort, more ease, more indulgence. You're told that if you just had enough money, enough time, enough freedom to do what you want, when you want, you'd be satisfied. But if that were true, why are we more anxious, distracted, and depressed than ever before? Why do people who can access every form of stimulation still feel chronically unfulfilled? Nietzsche saw this coming over a century ago. In his critique of hedonism, the philosophy that pleasure is the highest good, he argued that the pursuit of constant pleasure weakens the human spirit. He called it decadent, life-denying. Not because pleasure itself is wrong, but because chasing pleasure can distract you from becoming who you truly are. To Nietzsche, the highest goal wasn't pleasure. It was strength. Not just physical strength, but inner strength. The ability to endure, to confront suffering, to create meaning even when it's hard. In his view, the man who always seeks comfort avoids the very experiences that could transform him. And in avoiding discomfort, he avoids growth. This is the tragedy of hedonism. It promises happiness, but often delivers numbness. But let's be honest, pleasure feels good. It's not just tempting, it's addictive. Your brain is wired to seek reward. Every notification, every sweet bite, every sensual distraction offers a momentary escape from pain or emptiness. You don't just crave pleasure because you're weak. You crave it because you're human. The problem isn't pleasure, it's what you're using it to avoid. When you use pleasure to escape yourself, you become dependent. And over time, you lose the ability to be still, to think deeply, to sit with discomfort without immediately reaching for relief. You lose resilience. You lose sovereignty over your own mind. Nietzsche believed that real freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's overcoming the need to do what feels good in the moment. He called this the will to power, the drive to rise above your instincts, to master your impulses, and to shape yourself through struggle. This isn't about self-denial for its own sake. It's about replacing shallow, fleeting pleasures with something deeper. The pleasure of strength, of meaning, of becoming someone who doesn't need to escape. And yet, our culture has made this incredibly difficult. We are surrounded by temptations engineered to be irresistible. Social media algorithms are designed to hijack your attention. Fast food is chemically crafted to override your natural hunger cues. Porn, gaming, online shopping. They are all built to provide rapid hits of dopamine without the need for effort, commitment, or depth. It's not just that we choose pleasure. It's that pleasure now chooses us. It finds us, surrounds us, consumes us. But here's the part no one tells you. The more you give in to easy pleasure, the more sensitive you become to discomfort. And the more sensitive you are to discomfort, the less you can endure challenge, the less you can pursue purpose. Eventually, you become someone who only moves toward what feels good and avoids what feels meaningful but hard. You become, in Nietzsche's terms, a last man. Someone who avoids all suffering, all danger, all transformation. Someone who survives, but never truly lives. Contrast this with Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch, the one who creates his own values, who transforms pain into power. The Übermensch doesn't reject pleasure, but he doesn't worship it either. He uses it wisely. He feels it, enjoys it, but he's not ruled by it. He knows that pleasure is fleeting, but meaning is enduring. And to build meaning, you must be willing to suffer, to delay gratification, to take the harder path, to say no when your body screams yes. Not out of self-hatred, but out of self-respect. So how do you begin to reclaim your life from pleasure? How do you stop being a slave to your cravings and begin building inner strength? First, you have to wake up. You have to start noticing when you're reaching for pleasure, not as a treat, but as an escape. That moment you scroll instead of feel. That moment you eat instead of reflect. That moment you say yes to another impulse because the alternative is facing your own silence. In these moments, something deeper is trying to emerge, and if you always numb it, you'll never hear what it's trying to say. You also need to reframe your relationship with discomfort. Most people see pain as the enemy, but Nietzsche saw it as a teacher. He believed that discomfort is not what holds you back, it's what wakes you up. The person you want to become is hiding behind the discomfort you avoid. Every time you resist the urge to indulge, every time you choose to be present instead of distracted, you're strengthening the very muscles that lead to freedom. It's not about becoming cold or rigid, it's about becoming disciplined, not in the military sense, but in the philosophical sense. Discipline is the ability to choose what's best over what's easy. It's the ability to shape your character intentionally, not let it be shaped by your environment. And this is where Fromm's insights complement Nietzsche's so powerfully. While Nietzsche emphasizes strength, Fromm reminds us that meaning comes through intentional living, that love, purpose, and freedom are only possible when you're not enslaved to your impulses. Fromm wrote that modern man is alienated, not just from society, but from himself, that in chasing consumption, we lose connection. And connection, not comfort, is what our souls truly crave. But to reconnect, we must be present. We must be awake. And we cannot do that while constantly sedating ourselves with pleasure. Ask yourself, what do you turn to when you're anxious? What do you reach for when you're bored? What's the pleasure you abuse, not because it brings you joy, but because it helps you avoid a feeling? These aren't bad habits, they are signals. Signals that something inside you wants attention, wants truth. And you can't hear that truth while your life is filled with noise. Now let's be clear. This isn't a call to become an ascetic, to live without joy, without rest, without delight. No. Nietzsche himself enjoyed one. Art and music. The goal is not to destroy pleasure, but to elevate it, to reclaim it, to stop letting it rule you and start choosing it consciously, in alignment with your highest values. That's the difference between a slave to pleasure and a master of the self. There's a kind of pleasure that nourishes and a kind that depletes. One leaves you with clarity, the other with regret. One builds your character, the other erodes it. And the only way to know the difference is to become conscious, painfully, uncomfortably conscious of your own motivations. To ask yourself, am I doing this because I want to, or because I don't want to feel something else? In the end, pleasure is not the problem. It's the unconscious pursuit of pleasure that dulls your spirit. When you wake up, when you learn to endure silence, when you learn to face boredom, fear, sadness without immediately reaching for relief, you begin to reclaim yourself. You begin to cultivate a different kind of joy, a joy that is earned, a joy that is stable, a joy that doesn't vanish the moment the screen turns off or the meal ends. Nietzsche wanted us to become warriors of the self, not in battle with our nature, but in harmony with it. Warriors who don't run from pain but integrate it, who don't live for comfort but for creation, who don't chase fleeting highs but build lasting inner peace. And that begins with a simple act. The next time you reach for pleasure, pause. Ask yourself, what am I really seeking? And what would it look like to find it not in escape, but in engagement? Because maybe the reason you feel so lost isn't because you lack pleasure. It's because you've never been taught how to be free. Before we continue, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What's one pleasure you find yourself turning to when you're avoiding discomfort? Leave a comment. And if this is resonating with you, consider subscribing so you don't miss more thought-provoking explorations like this one. Now, let's go deeper. Let's return now to the question that haunts so many people quietly in the moments between distractions. What am I doing all of this for? What is the point of a life spent in the constant pursuit of feeling good if it never leads to feeling fulfilled? The truth is that pleasure, when not grounded in purpose, becomes a trap, a loop. You chase the high, feel the temporary relief, and then fall right back into the same craving, the same emptiness. It's not because you're broken. It's because you're looking for something that pleasure alone can't give you. Erich Fromm would tell us that the human condition is marked by a deep longing, not just for comfort, but for meaning, for connection, for authenticity. But meaning requires depth, and depth requires discomfort. Think about it. The most important moments of your life, falling in love, facing failure, growing through loss, were not pleasurable in the hedonistic sense. They were painful, chaotic, often uncertain, but they were real. They left a mark. They shaped you. And that is what pleasure, in its shallow form, cannot do. It cannot change you. Fromm's critique of modern life was brutal in its clarity. He said we live in a society that worships consumption, that confuses freedom with indulgence, that tells us we are free when we are actually enslaved. Enslaved to products, to brands, to urges, to the approval of others. He believed that true freedom is not doing whatever you want, but becoming someone who can act with integrity, even when it's hard. Someone who is not swayed by every impulse, every fear, every craving. In that sense, Fromm and Nietzsche agree. Liberation begins within. But most people are terrified of that kind of freedom, because it comes with responsibility. If you are no longer ruled by your cravings, your past, your wounds, then who are you? What do you want? That's a question pleasure can't answer. And so we keep reaching, scrolling, numbing, Not because we're lazy, but because we're afraid of what might come up in the silence. Nietzsche believed that pain is not the enemy of life, it's the source of vitality. That without struggle, without sacrifice, we lose the capacity to feel deeply. He looked around at a society that was becoming increasingly soft, increasingly comfortable, and saw a warning. That when a culture begins to fear pain more than it values strength, it starts to decay from within. People become spiritually passive. They seek stimulation, but not transformation. They want to feel something, but they don't want to face anything. And yet, transformation is exactly what your soul is hungry for. Not more pleasure, not more distraction, but change. Real, radical change. The kind that requires you to strip away every illusion you've used to protect yourself, every habit you've used to escape, every narrative you've adopted just to make yourself feel safe. That kind of change hurts, but it heals, and it cannot happen until you stop numbing yourself. Fromm emphasized that love is not a feeling, but an art, something that requires attention, discipline, and practice. And what is love, if not the ultimate antidote to shallow pleasure? Love demands that you delay gratification, that you listen, that you show up when it's uncomfortable, that you care about something larger than your own momentary pleasure. But to love, truly love, you have to first be present. And pleasure addiction, hedonism in its compulsive form, destroys presence. It makes you reactive, distracted. It makes you seek relief instead of truth. Nietzsche once wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Without a why, you're left with nothing but the hows. How to feel better, how to stay entertained, how to avoid boredom. But if you have a why, if you know what you stand for, what you want to build, who you want to become, you can endure pain. You can embrace discipline. You can say no to the things that weaken you, not because you enjoy suffering, but because you enjoy becoming. But here's the catch. The world will never stop offering you easy pleasure. You have to decide, right now, who is in charge. You, or your appetite. You, or your fear of discomfort. You, or the algorithms and companies that profit from your distraction. Because every time you give in without thought, every time you seek pleasure without intention, you reinforce a habit. And that habit becomes a character. And that character becomes a destiny. You must begin to reclaim your time, reclaim your body, reclaim your capacity to choose. That means noticing the little moments, the 5 seconds before you reach for your phone, the subtle tension before you open that app, the quiet itch before you distract yourself. That's where power lives, in those 5 seconds. That's where freedom begins. Try something radical. Don't reach. Don't escape. Let yourself feel it, the boredom, the anxiety, the loneliness. It won't kill you. It's just a signal, a message. And if you stop drowning it in pleasure, you might finally hear what it has to say. This isn't about rejecting pleasure. It's about replacing your addiction to ease with a devotion to depth. Let your pleasures be earned, not escaped into. Let them follow effort, not replace it. Eat when you're truly hungry. Rest when you've truly worked. Connect when you're truly present. And find joy not in sedation, but in creation, in becoming. Nietzsche believed that the purpose of life was to become who you are. But you can't do that if your identity is built around comfort. You can't evolve if every hard moment is medicated. There is a different kind of life waiting for you. One where you feel more, not less. One where you are not just entertained, but empowered. One where you don't just exist, you create. And it starts with a single decision: to stop living like a consumer and start living like a creator. A builder, a philosopher of your own life. That means asking hard questions. What am I running from? What am I really craving? What do I want my life to stand for? These are not questions pleasure can answer. They are questions you answer with your choices, with your discipline, with your willingness to feel uncomfortable in service of something greater. Because the goal is not to suffer for suffering's sake. The goal is to become someone who doesn't need to avoid suffering in order to feel alive. Someone who doesn't fear silence, who doesn't need a screen to feel seen, who doesn't need constant hits of dopamine just to feel okay. That kind of person is rare, but they are free. Fromm believed that our task is not to seek pleasure, but to seek maturity. To grow into the kind of person who can love, who can serve, who can live with integrity in a world that constantly tempts you to do otherwise. That means taking responsibility for your mind, for your time, for your values. It means becoming the kind of person who chooses growth over comfort, meaning over numbness, strength over sedation. So ask yourself, what would your life look like if you stopped chasing the next hit of pleasure and started building something enduring? What would it feel like to wake up and know that you are not a slave to your cravings, but a master of your choices? What kind of relationships would you build? What kind of work would you do? What kind of peace could you feel, not from escaping, but from knowing you are living with integrity? That is the promise of this path. Not an easy life, but a deep one. Not a life of constant highs, but a life of real presence and real love. You'll never find that in your next distraction, but you will find it if you're willing to go within. If this message resonated with you, let it be a reminder that the search for meaning begins when the search for escape ends. Leave a comment with one insight or question that stood out to you. I'd love to hear it. And if you're ready for more thought-provoking explorations like this, make sure to subscribe. There's so much more ahead.